Welcome to Human Risk, a podcast dedicated to the understanding of human behaviour as a risk. Here's your host, Christian Hunt.
Hello and welcome back to the show. On this episode, I'm diving into a topic that for many of you will form part of your daily routine, something you enjoy but probably haven't given much thought to, and that is tea, as in the drink. Now for me, tea powers this podcast and my work in general, but it's so much more than just a drink. Tea brings people together, diffuses stressful situations, and carries fascinating behavioural dynamics. Depending on where you grew up or where you're listening, the meaning of the word tea might be very different. For some of you, it'll be a comforting hot drink. For others, an ice-cold refreshment. And to guide us through the rich and complex world of tea, I'm joined by Giles Oakley, a professional tea taster and someone that I happen to be at school with. After beginning his career with a major tea company, Giles co-founded his own business, Two Spoons Tea, to celebrate and elevate the drink in all its forms. And in a really interesting conversation, Giles takes us behind the scenes of tea tasting and blending, even doing a bit of live tea tasting on the show, sharing the stories and traditions behind an everyday staple. We'll explore how tea is produced, its rich history, and why it's far more complex than you might realise. Giles shares some stories from his career, the ethos of his company, and why he believes that tea deserves to be celebrated as a hero crop. You can look forward to tales of blindfolded tastings, the philosophy behind tea pillows as opposed to tea bags, and the delicate balance between tradition and innovation in the tea industry. Now, obviously, this is an episode that is best enjoyed with, what else, a cup, glass, or mug of your favourite tea. It's my discussion with Giles Oakley on the art and science of tea. Giles, welcome to the Human Risk Podcast.
Thank you very much for having me.
I'm so excited. I haven't seen you for years, and you have turned an amazing career. Tell my listeners a little bit about yourself and what you do.
Well, I am a professional tea taster. I joined the tea trade way back in 1998 as a trainee tea taster, which has now culminated with me having my own business.
Most people listening to this will understand what tea is and will come and explore what the nuances of it. But how do you get into the tea business? What was it that attracted you into that in the first place?
Well, the job advert, probably an indication of the sort of what the trade was at the time, was in the Daily Telegraph, and it said, trainee tea taster wanted, must be prepared to travel the world. And because I had a philosophy degree, I couldn't do anything else. I was very good at drinking tea, and I was very good at traveling. So I joined the Tetley graduate training program.
And this is taking you from understanding tea as a consumer into being an expert, understanding the nuances of it, how it's all...
Yeah, well, so it was a really interesting, the whole training program was fascinating. In fact, the very first test I had was a colour blindness test, because along with, Tom Cruise in Top Gun and Fireman Sam, we needed to take a colour blindness test as part of the screening process, because it's really important that you can distinguish different colours in tea. But no, the Tetley had a fantastic graduate training program, really a 5-year program of on-job training that involved a year overseas in tea origins. So I spent time in Kenya, Malawi, and India learning the trade from the bush to the cup.
Wow. I just love the idea of you take something that's a sort of simple part of everybody's life, and then you get into this level of detail of understanding where it comes from, how to blend it. I mean, it's way more complex, I think, than people assume, right? We all sort of think tea, we understand the concept, but...
Yeah, I mean, it's something I often say is we probably have a habit in this country of, we shuffle down in the morning, get our tea bag out of the cupboard, look out the window as the kettle boils, make the tea, and we don't think anything of it. But actually, there are 14 million people around the world involved in this trade. That tea has been tasted 7 or 8 times in the process of getting it to us. There's a huge number of people involved, like really passionate people, and I love sharing that because we do take it for granted. Tea is taken for granted nowadays.
And I guess it's probably a good moment just to, what is tea? Because I think it's obviously, and listeners in the US will think of it as a cold drink. Those of us in Europe tend to think of it as a hotter drink. How do we define what tea is?
Yeah, that's a good question, because we do talk about tea in quite a broad context. I mean, really, For me, tea is Camellia sinensis. That's a botanical name. Camellia sinensis means camellia from China. There are two main variants of Camellia sinensis. There's Camellia sinensis variety sinensis and Camellia sinensis variety asamicus. And basically all tea, as we know it, comes from those plants, whether it's Earl Grey, white tea, green tea, black tea, oolong, Darjeeling, it all comes from the Camellia sinensis. Whereas you also have, people sometimes call them like herbal teas. Some people probably erroneously call them botanicals, but that might be things like, and I say erroneously because tea is also really a botanical, but to separate the two, things like chamomile, peppermint, rooibos, they're all different botanical plants, but we infuse them all the same.
And so your tea career has involved being a buyer, being a blender. Talk us through what are the sort of rough different roles that people fulfill in the industry?
Well, I mean, from my side, from my job, I mean, it's a buyer blender. And so I was working for one of the big brands, and I started off as a trainee, learning how to taste. That was the core skill, tasting. And then taking on an origin, I'm going to say a minor origin from a production point of view. So I looked after Indonesia for a while, Papua New Guinea, Argentina, and then there were some bigger roles, like if you were buying the Assam tea or the Kenyan tea, that's like really significant. That was really significant volume and spend. That was exciting. Most of the tea, and people don't realise this, most of the tea that's drunk in this country is African. It's Kenyan, Malawi, Tanzania, Rwandan. So that was a big job. And then what I did was I did my overseas training, learned more about the supply chain and industry, and then I came back and I became a blender. And people have got funny thoughts about like blended tea. It's often thought as a negative thing, blending, but actually when you think about the cup of tea that you drink every single day, it's always the same. You want it to always be the same. And because tea is an agricultural product, it changes all the time. So what's arriving in this country is all different. You have to mix it together to create a consistent product. So blending, really important role. And then there are steps further down the supply chain you could do. So I was based in Calcutta for 2 years. That was where I had direct contact with the tea auction and direct contact with producers as well. So yeah, that was sort of a summary of what I did.
Talk us through the sort of blending and the tasting process, because you're trying to produce a consistent product. How does one do that?
So, I mean, the main way is categorizing tea, pigeonholing it really, and giving it grading. So maybe I could do a quick slurp. So so first thing we do is we look at it and we'll give it some visual gradings about its color, its brightness. We'll look at the leaf as well, because different leaf sizes give different, deliver different liquors and strengths, but also will influence what you can put it in. Will it fit into a tea bag, or will it go through the mesh of a tea bag, or will it fit nicely into a loose leaf pack? So
just to describe what you're doing to listeners here, you've got
so
kind of
we've
bowl.
got this specialist crockery that we use for making tea. So there's a cup with a lid. I've infused some tea. I've got my silver-plated tasting spoon that I was presented after 5 years of training, and I'm just going to make loads of noise because I want to aerate the tea around my mouth and my olfactory system. So a nice big slurp. And because I'm in the office with you, I'm not going to spit. But when we were tasting hundreds and hundreds of cups at a time, I'd have a spittoon and I'd spit into the spittoon. And then what you're looking for is some different characteristics. So you might be looking at the colour, the depth of colour, the mouthfeel, the impact on your mouth, and you give it a grading. And by mixing those gradings together, you can come up with a blend which hopefully will deliver more than the sum of its parts. So you're taking all the best qualities from one tea, all the best qualities from another tea, meshing them together to deliver a fantastic cup of tea.
And how do you preserve your palate? Because clearly that's a very important part of the role.
Yeah, it is. So it's interesting. When we were learning to taste, we often tasted together. So there'd be like let's say the master taster, who would be directing and leading the tasting session. And then there'd be a number of other people around the spittoon all tasting, often trainees. Now, we were told, one, avoid strong smelling food. Not so much because it means you can't taste, but actually it's just bad etiquette to be breathing like garlic or curry over somebody. But the other thing is, like, not that we were encouraged not to drink, but often a big, if you went on a bit of a bender the night before, that can block you up a bit sometimes. Some people, that blocks you up. And smell is a really important part of the tasting process. I mean, there are some reports that say like up to 70% of our perception of flavour actually comes through smell. So you want to keep that clear, you know. So it was, doing things that meant, like, when you were around a spittoon, you weren't putting your colleagues off. And then we would also have like counters of water, like bowls of water, you know, spaced out so that you could rinse out your palate as well.
And you've talked to me before we started recording about preconceptions, and you mentioned the idea of blindfold tasting.
Yeah. Well, so there was a couple of reasons. I mean, there's a couple of things around blindfolded tasting. So we taste a lot. When we're perceiving something, we often taste with our eyes first, and our eyes can influence our perception, ironically, of flavour. I think I mentioned to you before, there was a fantastic experiment where the subject is given 2 cups of coffee, one in a red mug and one in a blue mug, and they're asked, which mug of coffee do you prefer? Not knowing that actually the coffee is the same. And statistically, the result comes out that the red mug is favoured, because in the context of hot drinks, red is warm and it's comforting, and that's what you associate with a hot beverage, and blue is cold. So that's really interesting, because what that means is people are being influenced. They're making judgments about taste based on what they're seeing. And so what we need to do as tea tasters is be able to look objectively at the tea and not be influenced straight away by our sight. I mean, it is important. The visual elements are important. Like a dark coloured cup of tea looks strong. Doesn't necessarily mean it is strong in consumer terms, but it might look strong. So we have to put that to one side. And so when we're blind tasting, we'll cover our eyes, use a blindfold, taste, and that's isolating the taste and olfactory, the smell side of things, so you can really hone that. But it helps you, because also with sight, you can also guess like where a tea might be from. So it was actually really important for us we used to do these things called country of origin batches as a trainee, where you'd get 6 teas, be blindfolded, you'd have to taste them and then say where they were from. Very competitive amongst the tasting team. And then it got more sophisticated. So it wouldn't be just like, what country is it from? It would be, what region is it from? Or what taint can you taste here? There might be a smoky tea in here. Can you taste it? So that's a really important element. That's one reason we would isolate the sight, to eliminate the bias of first impressions.
When we think about the ways that people drink tea, obviously you're talking here about an environment where you're really focused on it. Most tea is consumed by people, as you said earlier, sort of not thoughtlessly, but it's part of a daily routine. And so are you thinking at all about the fact that the way that people might consume it at home, or that might be consumed in restaurants, that's very different to the way that you're consuming it when you're testing? Does that come into play, or are you just looking at the purity of the product?
So when we're doing that sort of tea assessment, at the end of the day, we are looking at that in pure tea terms, particularly as in the buying role. Actually, the blender was one step closer to the consumer in our business, and they would definitely have an eye on how it was being drunk. So, like we talked about, when we're actually tasting tea, we taste it double strength and brew it for 6 minutes. So that's like 6 grams of tea, 6 minutes. that's a strong cup of tea, and that's really to bring out all the nuances. But that is not how a consumer drinks it. So we would often then say, right, well, we've put a blend together and let's now taste it at consumer strength. The tricky thing is, the beautiful thing is about tea is that everybody drinks it differently. And that's great because you can personalize it, you can have it how you want. I mean, I can guarantee if I offer to make you a cup of tea, it won't be how you want it at home. So that's a good thing about tea, but it also presents challenges when you're out. Like for us now, our business customers, they're serving tea in pots to their customers in cafes. You have to think about how they want it as well. And it's one of the challenges with tea out of home is that you're making it for someone else. They won't like it like that. You know, they like it how they like it. And I think it's one of the challenges tea's had over the years out of home.
And you've reminded me, there's a thing that I was once told, which was if you're ever at work asked to make tea, you should make mediocre tea on the basis that you didn't want to be somebody that couldn't even make a cup of tea. But if you made it too well, you risk becoming the person that has to make tea. So there's that sort of balancing act. Yeah,
I mean, we definitely had that. And actually, it was even more of a challenge as a trainee when we were starting out, because what you'd be asked to go to the sample room and make a bungalow blend. Now, a bungalow blend is the tea. When you go to a tea estate, it's the cream of the day's manufacture that's brought back to the manager's bungalow. He would serve it to guests. So in the tea tasting sample room, where you have these thousands of samples, your boss would say to you, right, Giles, go upstairs and make a bungalow blend. And you'd have to put the samples together, get all the best teas, and then go and prepare it and make it for all of the tea tasters in the department. And it was a fine line. You know, on the one hand, there was that professional pride of, I want to make a really good bungalow blend that people are impressed with. But if you did it too well, you'd have to do it every time. So actually we ended up like leaving and setting up a business with a bungalow blend. But it was good times. So.
And obviously when you're out buying tea, I presume there's a whole host of options you could do when you're out in the field, but you've obviously got very strict mandates as to what it is you need to buy.
Yeah, I mean, we have a blend. I mean, ultimately the blend is the standard. So that's the benchmark by which you have to buy everything. But there are definitely criteria that you need to meet, not just around taste and quality parameters, but, maybe you want some particular type of standards. So if you wanted to, for example, have a Rainforest Alliance standard tea, you would go to that set of gardens. You might have a fair trade brand. You have to go to those certified gardens. You have to have a really clear picture of the supply chain and go right back to origin to see what's going on. And you also have to think about where the tea is. You can buy tea that's lying in Mombasa, but you can buy tea that hasn't even been grown yet. I can buy tea that's still, on a bush, or I can buy tea that's going to be produced in April, or I can buy tea that's landed in a warehouse in Lincolnshire. There's lots of different ways of doing it.
And so you had this long career working for a large organisation, and then you decide that you want to set up on your own or with a friend.
Yeah, so I think I'd had a career of about, I want to say 20 plus years with one company that changed a lot, but I was getting further and further away from the product, more into people and spreadsheets and senior management. What I realised from having my own company is I still need to do spreadsheets. I'm just not as good as I was. But and I just decided I wanted to take matters back into my own hands, get back into with the product, buy tea that I loved, buy tea from people I knew, buy tea from places I've been to, which I didn't always have the opportunity of doing in my previous role. And it's been fantastic. It's been working for yourself is an eye-opener. I mean, I remember on the first day, I was typing away at my computer. I threw a bit of paper in the bin, probably did that for a month or two. And I was thinking, why is the bin still full? And I realized that I'm not just the owner of a company, but I'm the person that IT help desk. I clean the bins, obviously not today, but I hoover the floor, you had to do everything. And I think that was that meant learning a lot. So social media, I'm nearly a 50-year-old man. What do I know about social media? We've had to learn very rapidly, learn about sales. Actually we weren't salespeople. We had to learn about how to be influencers. So yeah, it's been quite a journey.
And so what's the sort of ethos of the company? Because you've obviously as you explain, you master your own destiny in a sense. When you decide to set the company will do what you decide you want the company. How do you start to think about that? What types of tea you're going to sell, what the philosophy of it is?
Well, I think what we, at the outset, we wanted to champion tea because we felt and we feel tea is an unsung hero, but it is a hero. It's a hero crop. It's good for you. It employs loads of people. It tastes good. And that social element, tea brings you together. So we wanted to champion tea through our experience, our expertise and our products. So that's what we wanted to do. We're a tea company run by tea tasters. So all our decisions, tea comes first. It's not about, let's buy that, it's a bit cheaper, but it's about making sure we've got fantastic tea that we think people will like or people need to try, and telling those stories around tea. It's taken us a while to get to really crystallize that. But it's clear, and it's how we live our lives. We go around, I was just saying to you earlier, we've probably given 50 talks to various groups around our region of the Chilterns and Buckinghamshire, and people love tea. They love tea. They've probably forgotten they love tea, but they live with tea. It's part of their lives. They're drinking 3-4 cups a day, but they're never in contact with it. It's in a tea bag often. So they're never touching and feeling tea. And I had a colleague, an Indian colleague, when I was in Calcutta, who said, when the people making tea over here, they're getting it out of a packet, they're feeling it, they're touching it, they're smelling it, they're seeing it. They've got a more emotional connection with it. I think we're awakening that emotional contact idea that people have about tea.
And you mentioned tea bags. You sell tea pillows.
We sell a tea pillow. Yeah. So we sell tea in bags, and we call those bags pillows because they're a pillow shape. And the guy that puts them into pillows for us, he called them pillows. And I thought, do you know what? A pillow is soft, it's comforting, brings you relaxation. That is the perfect vehicle for tea. And so, yeah, they're pillow shaped. I think everybody else has got pyramids. We've got pillows. We like it. We like a pillow.
And that's a really good indication of the sense of fun that the clearly is pervasive in the way that you approach this, and the packaging, the branding, 2 spoons, and it's sort of obvious given the slurping that you know where that comes from. But there's a sense of fun behind this, and so this is a tea lovers company.
And I think we've always said, there is that maxim about you come to work, you spend a huge amount of time at work. Let's make it fun. We're doing our own thing now. We can do what we want at work. And why wouldn't you try and have fun at work? We have, we want a sense of humour. We're 2 spoons tea. We're named after our tasting spoons, but we are also a couple of spoons in the, I know there's a Chris Evans used to say on the radio, Mr. Spoon, but work should be fun if you can make it. And it is a fine balance, actually. We want to have we're experts. We're experts in what we do. We have knowledge that we want to impart. And if you dilute it with too much humour, it's like there's a couple of clowns coming around to try and sell us tea. We don't want to be clowns, but we can have fun doing it. I think probably on social media, my 2 boys would say, you're a clown, but that's because they're teenagers and embarrassed by everybody. So, but no, we think it's important to have fun. It is part of what we do.
And there's something interesting here about this is a substitute product, right? So the people that you're selling to are presumably, aside from new cafes that are opening up, they will already be using tea.
Yeah.
So you are looking to replace something that's already there, and that's quite an interesting sort of substitutional challenge.
Yeah, and it's different depending on who's there. There are a couple of brands that one we started getting in because we had a local blend. We got this Bucks blend, which because we started off sort of just after COVID, there still really was that vocal for local, ethos that we benefited from. People say, actually, this is a local tea brand. There's a story behind it. We put a little bit of Darjeeling in our Bucks blend because Darjeeling is the champagne of teas and Bucks is a posh county. So there's a story behind it and people could relate to it and people could relate to us. But there are some substitutions we're trying to crack because we're saying to people, hey, listen, people are coming out to your cafe for a cup of tea. Why are you giving them PG tips? I could have that at home. Go bigger and actually don't be embarrassed about charging more. Tea is the cheapest drink in the world after water. We should be paying for our tea. It needs to get back into the supply chain. That money, we need to reinvest in the supply chain. So charge more, get decent tea in, and people will notice. And we've done that with a couple of companies here where we've said, right, yes, our tea's more expensive, but you can, your customers are prepared to pay more for a really good cup of tea. They actually love tea. They want good tea. And we've had some brilliant success doing that as well.
And I think there's a whole fascinating thing for me about and as I was sort of prepping for this conversation, thinking about, I guess, teapots, just as an example of an artifice that's part of it. And so there's everything from drinking it out of mugs to drinking it out of fine china cups. There's a lot of theatre with this.
Yeah, there's all sorts, and it goes back right from the beginning. It's interesting. One of the stories around why we drink milk, why we have milk in our tea is because when the first ceramic, the china came with the tea, it was very, very fine. We would use boiling water and that would crack the ceramic cups. So milk in first was a way of diluting that temperature. Okay. So when there's this sort of question, milk in first, tea in first, if there was almost like a social element to, well, if you had really, really fine china, you'd go milk in first because that meant you owned fine china and were diluting it. But then there's all sorts of paraphernalia. You've got some amazing teapot, like you go to the Tea History Museum, there's a teapot that's, I don't know, I think it can make about 4 gallons of tea. You got cups, saucers. You had tea pets, these little things that absorbed, like good luck charms. So yeah, there's all sorts of, and yeah, the tea caddies. So tea caddies in Georgian times had locks on them because tea was so expensive. You wanted to keep the maidservants, away from the tea. You'd lock it and you'd wear it around your neck, the tea and the sugar. So there's a lot of history, a lot of culture.
You talked about, it's a very personal choice about how we like to do that. And one of the things I think is nice is that you, on your packaging, you recommend, this is how we have it.
Yeah.
But there's never a sense of this is the right way to do
it.
And
that's really deliberate. There's no doubt that if you make green tea with boiling water, 100, it's going to be more astringent and it's going to taste a bit more bitter. But we're never going to tell you how to do it. People say, well, you must do it for this long. No, you don't. You do it how long you like it. We always encourage people to experiment. People say, I don't like that. It's too strong. Okay, well, a bit less time or use a bit less tea. But no, we'll never dictate how people drink it. That's a deliberate ploy. Well spotted. Thanks for reading the packaging.
Well, no, it was interesting because one of the things I thought was lovely was it's quite an particularly because I spent a lot of time in Germany and there are certain tea stores there where you go in, it's all a bit overwhelming. And one of the things I thought was lovely about what you're doing is not just that it's high quality and it's fun, but also you're helping curate. You don't have a million teas that I can pick from. There's a sensible number to choose that give me a variety. And so it felt like a sort of experimental fun thing and therefore helping me try this combination that we think works and then do what you want with it.
Yeah.
And I thought it made it less daunting in many respects.
Yeah. And again, like we have got a range that covers most bases. I think we've got a vehicle, through loose leaf tea when we can play around. So we do limited edition things. We've got a fantastic Darjeeling first flush, which I'm going to throw this in there. It won a gold medal at the Great British Food Awards, but that's a seasonal thing. That is a single origin. There's no blending there. That comes from a very specific estate, and that's fun for us as well. It's almost like it's a bit indulgent because even if no one buys it, we can drink it all. So that's a good way of doing it. And actually, in the past, we have said to people, experiment. The reason we've got loose leaf tea is we've got the teas that go into our blends. So that if you've, say, found the bungalow blend too strong, you could add a bit more Kenyan tea or a bit more Ceylon tea or a bit more Assam tea. And that's how they did it in the old days. You go into a tea shop, like the old wholesale shop, and they'd blend it for you on the counter. You could pick things off. And I like that as well, because that's a sort of nod to that blending that we did. Experiment yourself, touch the tea, feel it, blend it round, have a play. And there are some companies doing that. There's Bird and Blend, they're a fantastic company with a million varieties of tea that we would never think about doing. But it's these flavoured teas that are going to excite like the younger generation into trying and tasting tea, because sadly, I think it's an aging drink, and so we all have a part to play to make it accessible.
And there's an interesting balance here between, I guess, innovation and tradition, and you're sort of straddling both of those things in the sense of, I always look at these things as tradition makes. There are reasons certain traditions found it. So the way that you might blend, you haven't sort of reinvented the wheel on that front, because it makes sense and it works. On the other hand, you're also looking at, well, where can we push the boundaries? So there is this interesting balance in your business of a very traditional activity, and methodologies and processes that you're steeped in, pun fully intended. But you're also looking to say, how can we transform that? So that's quite an interesting thing, because I guess where I'm going with this is there's some rules there in a way, and you're able to take the rules that you think make sense, but also break the ones that don't.
Yeah, I mean, I think we are steeped in a particular culture of tea. The tea taster, the tea blender. There are rules. There is history, and I think we would never. There's no point in throwing that out. It's how we've got to where we've got to. There's some great traditions. The crockery we use. In fact, I remember it was when I was a trainee, I was asked to do an article on it was like tea tasting then and now, because they pulled some photos out of the Lions, Allied Lions archives, and I realised they were doing it exactly the same way, 80 years ago as they are now. The only difference is we were weighing out tea with weights. In those days, they were using a silver sixpence. That was, that was the difference, really. So there are some great traditions. I think there's a different way of looking at things, and people are interested in different things now. So, packaging, for example, tea bags. People don't want plastic in their tea bags, or they're really conscious about having sustainable packaging and sustainable sourcing. So your supply chain is so important. And I don't think people thought about that, 15, 20 years ago. So it's a very different, or at least 20 years ago. So it's a very different world now. I mean, I think tea is ripe for innovation. It is certainly coming through with what, you can see on the market now. There's also an education piece. Think about iced tea. In the UK, iced tea for a lot of people is cold. It's cold tea left in the pot, or that you've forgotten about. It hasn't gone down well here, but in some countries it's absolutely huge. Actually, you can go into a number of towns around here and get bubble tea. What a fantastic innovation there, that's been brought. So it is right for more innovation. I think we've picked what we know, and we want to share those traditions and those experiences with our customers, because we need to re-educate and reignite that passion for it.
When I think about sort of taking your work home, one of the things that's interesting when you work for yourself is that dividing line between business and pleasure. And I see it myself, there isn't a sort of time where you clock off work, but you can leave the location where you're doing work. I'm guessing for you, this could be all consuming in the sense that it's sort of all around you. It's not, you can't, I'll put it this way, you can't escape the product when you're at home, or...
Definitely. There's the product side of things, definitely. And although Yeah, mostly because I'm the only person in the house that will make me a cup of tea. Like trying to get my kids to make me a cup of tea, is hard work. So I just want to be brought a cup of tea. I want the best cup of tea in the world isn't an Assam, a second flush Assam or a first flush Darjeeling. It's the tea that somebody's brought you without being asked. They just brought you a cup of tea and you go, oh, thank you. Oh, I wasn't expecting that. But I think actually, more seriously, I think the challenges for a small business now is exposure, and so the thing that takes up most of my time outside of the office is the social media side of things. And I don't think I've got the balance right. Again, you want to get out there. A lot of businesses are interacting on social media. You need to respond immediately or you've missed an opportunity. So that, I think, I need to work out a way of doing that better. And also I'm a really bad influence on the kids because they see that and they think that's a license to sort of flick through their phones. But that's where the lines are most blurred.
But it's an interesting thing, isn't it? Because I guess, as with the product, the marketing needs to be authentic to the business.
Yeah.
Because you put your names behind it in the brand and in the product. And therefore, it's not as if you could outsource that to someone else and kind of go and be Giles online.
It's a really good point, and it's something we've talked about before because we did a series of we have done a series of videos that are like reels online that are our tone of voice, our humour, trying to impart knowledge as well. And you think, well, how could I outsource that? And I can't really. I have to be in it, but it can be, it can take up a lot of time. It's like resource hungry and brain power hungry as well. So it's a challenge, but it's been really successful for us because we've got customers, like business customers through that. And we've got, online customers through that. So it's been beneficial, but it's hard work.
I'm intrigued by the sort of educating people piece, because there's you obviously have to make the product accessible, right? Nobody wants to buy a drink that requires a huge amount of complexity. I have to work out how to drink this, and hence I think the idea of not being too prescriptive in here's a recommendation, but you do what the hell you like, right? It's your tea, you buy it, you drink it the way you want. And so this interesting balance, I guess, between, on the one hand, you do need to help people a little bit because it may not be obvious, and that's maybe a generational thing. It may be that you're introduced into different types of teas that they've never had before, or back to your point about, well, blend it yourself, right? Try play a little bit with that. So there is an educative element, but if there's too much of, you can end up in a situation where it becomes a highly complex. It's almost like I don't want to have to read an instruction manual in order to be able to use the thing because it doesn't feel like something that ought to have that. And so I think there's an interesting thing there where you sort of, and I think from what I can see, you're getting that balance right of sort of like pointing towards the things you could do with this. We'll give you a little bit of help so you can think about this, but it's not an overwhelming, highly complex thing.
Yeah, and I think you're right. There is a balance, and there's a number of probably elements that I pick up there. So when you talk tea to somebody who knows that you're a tea expert, and you say, and I'll say, what do you drink? And they're almost embarrassed. They'll say, just some bog standard. And as soon as they say bog standard, I feel like I need to educate because it's tea, whether it's PG, Tetley, Two Spoons, it's all it's come from these far away places. So much effort's been put in, and for it to be, I don't want people thinking that tea is bog standard. I think it is a fantastic product, and it reminds me a bit of when we went and did an exchange with the brewing trade. We went over to Chiswick to see Fuller's, and I just asked the guy, that's the master brewer at Fuller's. I said, "What do you think of Foster's?" Just to see what he'd say, and he said, "Do you know what? Foster's is a really clean lager. It's well made. It serves a purpose. Absolutely nothing wrong with it." And in the way he echoed what like I feel about those brands. The education piece is also just about tea itself. When we do our talks, we always do a quiz. Like we do a quiz just to see what people know and make them make funny noises and things like that. But one of the questions, we do a true or false, true or false. Tea has more caffeine than coffee. The average cup of tea, the average cup of coffee, tea has more caffeine than coffee. True or false?
I think that's true. That's what I've been told.
It's false.
Oh, okay.
Tea has half the caffeine of coffee, and that's the point. So you can imagine people then making, drinking decisions based on that. Say, oh, actually, I don't want so much caffeine. I'm going to have a coffee instead. It's getting a bit later on. Tea has half, and it also has this brilliant compound called theanine, which has a calming effect. So tea gives you this. There is caffeine, so it gives you a calm alertness, whereas coffee's more like a whack round the face with a wet kipper. And so things like that, that people don't know that tea comes from Kenya. Like most of the tea comes from Kenya. They don't know that. Decaffeination. People are always asking about decaf. Like that's one of the number one questions when we do the Q&A at the end. Tell me about decaf. How is it decaffeinated? Is it grown decaffeinated, or where does it happen? And so it's not necessarily a high level of education, but given that people are interacting with this product 3, 4, 5 times a day, the knowledge is, we could definitely sort of raise that, the level of knowledge people have.
That's really interesting. So I will obviously have to ask you about decaffeination now that you've raised it. How does that work?
Well, I mean, so tea has caffeine in it, and so extraction is usually either a solvent or liquid, pressurized liquid CO2 that dissolves the caffeine. It's passed through, so it dissolves the caffeine, and then you wash the tea and then you dry it, and then it's something we resisted for a while because we wanted to promote things like peppermint, chamomile, rooibos that are naturally caffeine free, but the market wants what the market wants, and so we added it to our range. But as I say, it does have less. And the other thing about tea, like for an education purposes, a lot of people think it's a diuretic, but there's been a lot of research to show that actually, 4 or 5 cups of tea contributes to your, the hydration that you need, the level of hydration that you need. So there's all these myths around tea that we need a tea myth busting group, and we're doing that in our own small way, around the church halls and village halls of Buckinghamshire and Oxfordshire. So, but yeah, there is an education piece there.
And it's fascinating to talk about that, because I was thinking about obviously there's Yorkshire tea, and there are people who think the tea is grown in Yorkshire.
100%. Yeah, 100%. I mean, there is tea growing in this country in very, very small quantities, and it's pretty average from a quality perspective. But Yorkshire tea is not from Yorkshire, There's tea that grows in Jersey, there's some tea in Cornwall. I've got a little tea bush in my garden. It's from a seedling from Tregothnan in Cornwall. One day it'll be a plantation. I did actually make some tea using that bush. I harvested the leaf, rolled it, brewed it, and it was pretty lackluster. So I'll leave that to the professionals.
Yeah. And I guess as we think about you talked a little bit about the history of it, supply chain, what sort of 21st century expectations around the business. And obviously there's an interesting history to tea and where it's come from. That is obviously a challenge that you think about in terms of your supply chains.
Yeah.
And so is that easy to do now? Is the infrastructure around the industry such that you can, ensure that you're getting it from suppliers that both have the quality, but also don't impose you problems from an ethical perspective?
Yeah, no, I definitely that's in place. And I'd say probably, I keep saying 25 years ago. I've said that for the last 5 years. Probably about 30 years ago, the industry set up what is now the Ethical Tea Partnership to really to confirm the standards with which tea is being grown, because we knew tea estates were doing a whole lot. I mean, tea estates do a whole lot for the communities that they're in. At the time, they are also in some challenging environments. So you do need processes in place and checks and balances in place to make sure that the law is being adhered to. And there's been a huge effort from, cross all sectors to address and confirm all the good things that are going on, but also identify things where things aren't. And it'd be wrong to suggest that there aren't things that still need work. But there are things in place so that you can, if you know what to do, you can get the tea that you want. And also supply chains have got shorter as well. I mean, we're a small company, so we use an old friend of ours to help us import tea. But again, like I'm saying, the old days, it used to pass through a number of different hands before it got to you. Nowadays, you're dealing directly with the producer. They're much more aware of the end consumer now. They're not 5 or 6 different parties apart. So
amazing. I could keep talking to you forever. I'm conscious of time, but before I let you go, give us what's your favourite tea?
Well, I mean, I have to say, I have said the one that's made by somebody else, but I've had a couple of great cups of tea in my time. One of the ones that really sticks out is a Darjeeling tea that I had at 6 o'clock in the morning in a bungalow in Darjeeling that I'd witnessed the manufacture the night before. So I'd gone round the factory. They'd let me sort of pour some of the leaf in, and it was the first flush. So this is the first growth of the season. And this is tea that would, because of it being the very first, it has this invoice number, DJ01. So DJ01 is like, it's got such a cachet, it's like premium tea. And so they let me be involved in it, and then to slurp it as the sun was coming up over the Himalayas. Am I painting a picture?
That's beautiful.
You're almost there.
Yeah.
You're almost there on this dark night in Chesham. But that was pretty amazing. And then because I'm a slight glutton, I think the street tea in Calcutta, because the street tea in Calcutta, this masala chai, where they brew it up, milk, water, loads of sugar, tea, and then the spices, cardamom, ginger, pepper. Sometimes I'll put cloves in, and just bubbling it all up 15, 20 minutes till you've got this sticky, sweet, delicious tea. That's also a fantastic cup of tea.
Wow. Beautifully described.
Thank you.
Tell people what the website is. I'll put links in the show notes, but tell people.
So we are Two Spoons Tea, just so in case you didn't know. Two Spoons Tea, we are www.twospoons.co.uk, or you can follow us on Instagram. That is at Two Spoons Tea.
Fantastic. Links to that in the show notes. The tea obviously comes highly recommended. But it's been an absolute pleasure catching up with you. But thank you so much, because I feel massively better informed about tea. I love the passion with which you approach this. It just comes out in the way that you talk about it and the stories that you tell. And that, I think, feeds through into the product. So it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. It's an absolute pleasure drinking your tea. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Nice to see you.
That's it for this episode of the show. My enormous thanks to Giles for appearing and for hosting me at an in-person tea tasting while we recorded it, and to you for listening. To find out more about Giles, his company, Two Spoons Tea, and the delicious varieties of tea that they sell, have a look in the show notes. You'll find links to those and some of the other subjects that we talked about there. If this is your first time listening to the Human Risk Podcast, where have you been? But thank you so much for joining me. You can subscribe wherever you get your quality audio content. It's available on all of the major podcasting platforms. To discover episodes of the show that you might have missed, and there are over 300 of them now, visit the show's website, which is humanriskpodcast.com. If you like the show and have yet to leave a review, whichever platform you're listening to it on, please do so there. It really, really does help. I will be back very soon with another episode of this show. But in the meantime, stay safe, enjoy slurping whatever your favourite tea is, and thank you so much for listening.